Hello, I'm David Gordon Koch, reporting for the NB Media Co-op. I'm speaking to Ryan Forneri, one of the co-founders of Spoke Media Network. He's joining us from the Hamilton, Ontario area. Thanks for joining the NB Media Co-op today, Ryan.
Thanks for having me.
Well, over the past year, Spoke Media has produced a series of mini documentary style videos uh, published on YouTube on topics such as the open AI scandal, the politics of grocery prices, and dating apps. One of the most successful of these videos, I think, in terms of how many people are watching them, is about the Irving family in particular and their influence on New Brunswick. It was published about 8 months ago, and since then it has been viewed about 117,000 times, according to YouTube. At the NB Media Co-op, we noticed it's been circulating a lot on social media. You are the director, writer, and editor of this production. So, first of all, can you tell me what prompted you to make this short documentary?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, I had never heard of the Irvings. I had a Reddit thread sent to me by a friend. I can't remember the exact topic of the thread, but it was something along the lines of what is a bad thing going on in your area that nobody knows about. And one of the top comments was about the Irving family and the influence that they have over New Brunswick and all the different things therein. And as I started to research that, it was just this rabbit hole of falling into of the history of the Irving family, the incredible influence they have in New Brunswick, a lot of very shady deals and things that they've done over time that certainly is worthy of criticism. And one of the things that we want to focus on at Spoke Media is Canadian content, things that are often overlooked in Canada. And so it fit really well into that, and it's just a really interesting story to tell as well.
Hmm. And so, yeah, you went into this kind of rabbit hole of information. What kind of sources did you get into for this research?
Yeah, so I mean, there was a CBC documentary done in the '90s, early 2000s, or something like that. Could have even been earlier. I can't remember exactly the year now. That was one of the first things I came across. Obviously, it's dated, but it sort of gave a snapshot of that period. Um, One of the things that was interesting in doing the research was that there wasn't a lot of information readily available.
Mm.
I mean, there was sort of surface level stuff, but um, I believe it was the Canadian Observer had done a series of articles about the Irving family. There were, a number of things in the Globe and Mail and CBC about different things over time. But yeah, part of the reason that it felt like this was a story that we wanted to tell was there wasn't a lot in terms of documentaries or in terms of even short YouTube videos or things that were readily available to the public that sort of summed up the totality of the Irving family and their influence in New Brunswick. Um, so it was a fair amount of work to combine all those different sources and sort of put the pieces together over time.
It's actually one of the reasons the NB Media Co-op was founded was to have an alternative to the what was, as you noted in the mini doc, a monopoly on the newspapers in the province of New Brunswick. And yeah, you do a great job bringing together these different sources and with some interesting archival footage. This CBC documentary that you mentioned, for example. So some really interesting footage in there. As you know, I mean, this was about 8 months ago that this was published. So there's been some pretty significant changes in the Irving family saga since then. They're going through a sort of generational succession now, following the deaths of the billionaire brothers J.K. Irving and Arthur Irving. During this time, we've seen tributes to them from various quarters, such as Premier Blaine Higgs, who was a former Irving oil executive, also the editorial board of the Telegraph Journal, newspaper that was until very recently owned by JDI, JD Irving. But even, to take another example, New Brunswick Senator Nancy Hartline, who's, I would say, relatively progressive senator, published a write-up in her newsletter calling James K. Irving one of New Brunswick's great builders and a significant driver in New Brunswick's economy. So your doc, I think, takes a much more critical position. Did you notice that the video was being shared more following these recent deaths in the Irving Empire? Or I don't know if you observed if you, watch the stats that closely.
Yes, absolutely. There were two moments when the video got a lot of views. The first was, I think, around the end of 2023, there were rumors that Irving Oil was for sale. And that was the first series of upticks in views. And the second was definitely around the time that Arthur passed away. And I think that just has to do with increased interest in the Irvings around that time. And like you said, they're going through this generational succession where in the recent history they've had to break up the empire because of tax reasons. And now the old guard is sort of gone and the new generation is taking over the businesses. And so I think there is a renewed interest in what is going to happen with the Irving family and their companies and whether they can continue to have the level of power and influence they have or whether it's going to slowly diminish with the new generation. So yeah, I think those things have coincided with the interest in the video. And I think in a way, the Irving family is sort of representative of this thing that Canadians across the country are feeling, which is as things are getting more expensive, it feels like more and more of the country's resources are concentrated in the hands of a few people or a few companies. So obviously the Irving story has the most relevance in New Brunswick, but I think people like the Irving's company, like companies like Irving Oil and JDI, are all over the country in one form or another, and so I think that resonates with people as well.
So inequality and attention to the rising cost of living, maybe generating some interest, additional interest in, these billionaire families who are, really among the richest people in the world when you consider that they figure on the Forbes list, for example.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you definitely take a critical stance with regards to the Irving family's power. Saying, for example, in New Brunswick, they get what they want when they want, no matter who's in office. And you comment at the end that, at least for now, New Brunswick is a company town. Do you think that the popularity of this mini doc shows there's a hunger for this kind of critical commentary about the Irvings or about the billionaire class, if you will, more generally?
Yes, definitely. I think our other video that's done really well is about Doug Ford's government in Ontario and the premature shutting down of the science center and the way that corporate interests and that sort of thing factor into that. So we've definitely seen in the videos we're producing that there is a lot of interest in the way that corporations and the wealthy elites in the country sort of influence our day-to-day lives. Um, as far as the critical stance on the Irvings, I think too part of what I tried to get across or we tried to get across was the way that provinces and governments in general get themselves into sort of a tricky situation with businesses this large, where once they get to a certain size, especially in a smaller demographic like New Brunswick, if the Irvings were to move their business somewhere else, it would have a tremendous impact on the economy and on jobs and on working people. But at the same time, them being there and dictating the way that, in some ways, the government spends their money, the way that workers are paid, the way that jobs are structured, also has a negative impact. So I think provincial governments sort of get into a sticky situation where there is no clear answer. Um, and they are, in many ways, sort of beholden to the companies as opposed to the way that it's supposed to be, where governments are able to regulate and change the way that companies run, and that companies are sort of further down the ladder than they are, but it doesn't always work that way.
Well, we'll link to the video on our website, nbmediacoop.org. Anything else to add before we wrap up, Ryan?
Uh, yeah, just if you want to see other content like the Irving's documentary, um, you can head to our YouTube page at Spoke Media Network, and we have a ton of other documentaries like that.
Well, thanks a lot. We've been speaking to Ryan Fernary, co-founder of Spoke Media Network. Thanks again for speaking to us today, Ryan.
Thank you for having me.